Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances. Glory to Prabhupada. So we'll resume our discussion in chapter 6 from verse 5. Udaretatmanatmanam natmanam avashadaye atmevayatmano bandhur atmevripuratmanaha. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. So beginning from this verse, Krishna is talking about the advanced yogi. So 5 verses from 5 to 9 is going to talk about the yoga rudha, the one who is at a point where he is sufficiently advanced to give up all work, where he has reached the stage of samadrishti and he does not depend on karma or gyan for purification. So here we see the word Atma coming twice, right? So it said Udaret Atmana Atmanam. So the first usage is Atma as the conditioned soul. And then in the third line we see that Atmanave Atmano Bandhur Atmev Ripur Atmana. That the Atma over here refers to the mind. And this we have discussed in the past, that Atma is a word that can contextually mean several things. It can also point to the gross body, the subtle body, the spirit soul. It can even point to the Lord. So here we see it being used in 2 ways. One is pointing to the conditioned soul and the second to the mind. So Krishna's injunction is that one should use the mind to elevate and not to degrade. And the mind can be the friend as well as the enemy. So the mind is the friend when the mind is being controlled, and the mind is the enemy when the mind controls the conditioned soul. So for a person who has sufficient self-control, that is no longer driven by the dictates of the mind, will not degrade himself. And the implicit message here is that mind by nature will degrade a person. Mind is considered in the mode of passion, so it will basically force the jiva to engage with the sense objects. Now, one thing interesting you'll notice here is that this instruction seems to be a little different from one of the earlier instructions Krishna gave. So here Krishna is saying that use the mind to deliver yourself. So he is asking the conditioned soul to use the mind to deliver. But earlier on in the 3rd chapter, towards the end, Krishna makes this point where he says that the working senses are superior to the dull matter, mind is higher than the senses, intelligence is higher than the mind, and the soul is even higher than the intelligence. Right? So the soul essentially is sitting 2 levels above the mind. Above the mind is intelligence and then the soul. So there the instruction is that the jiva should control the mind through intelligence. Right? And here the instruction is that the jiva should use the mind to deliver itself, almost indicating that the mind is superior. Because if one is bound, then one goes to something that is superior to oneself to deliver. So one way to understand this is that in 342, the instruction that Krishna gives is more on a philosophical absolute platform. So the hierarchy that he's establishing, that there is the senses, then there is the mind, and there is the intelligence, and then there is the soul, that's the hierarchy. And because everything is happening by the will of the soul, so the soul desires, and based on that the intelligence, mind and senses are engaged, that hierarchy is explained. So essentially what Krishna is saying is, at that point to Arjuna, is that align your desires in a way that the intelligence, mind and the senses are also properly engaged. Now here Krishna is talking about it not from a philosophical perspective but from a practical perspective. Because, and we all have experience with this, that if the mind is, if the soul is already contaminated with material desires, then it is almost impossible for the soul to correct itself. Just like the example is given that if a person is occupied by a ghost, then even though the person still is in control theoretically, but because of the presence of the ghost, he cannot free himself. He cannot say, okay, I expel the ghost, right? Because the ghost has now taken control. Similarly, for a conditioned soul, the material desires have taken control. So asking the conditioned soul to dispel the material desires and control the mind is difficult. So Krishna is now giving what is more actionable, which is follow the rules and regulations of the scriptures, which will implicitly control the mind. So because you cannot control it intrinsically, because the jiva is bewildered, but if the jiva has enough foresight to submit to the scriptures, then the scriptures will control the mind for you. And through that, the jiva can now expunge material desires. So Srila Prabhupada in the purport says that the word he is used in order to emphasize that one must do this, right? So for a person who is an advanced yogi, there is no other option. The person must control the mind. Okay, moving on to the next verse. Verse 6. Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatmevatmana jitaha anatmanastu shatrutve vartetatmeva shatruvat. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So here we see now the proper hierarchy is again been established. So when Krishna says for him who has conquered the mind, he's talking about the jiva, right? So now in the previous verse, Krishna has said that one must deliver oneself with the mind. So essentially, it is the desires of the jiva that is manifesting in terms of how the mind is acting. So the two situations are expanded over here. Under when will the mind be a friend? When the mind is conquered. Conquered means under control. And when it is the greatest enemy, then unconquered mind. So the reason is that the nature of the mind is to draw a person to sinful activities. So Prabhupada says that as long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, etc. But when the mind is conquered, so what does conquering of the mind mean? Conquering of the mind means that one voluntarily agrees to abide by the the Vedic injunctions. Right? And when voluntarily follows the do's and don'ts of the scriptures. Elsewhere Prabhupada says that the symptom of a conquered mind is surrender to Guru. And they're all saying the same thing, because the scriptures are the words of the Krishna, the Guru is the representative of Krishna. So they're all essentially saying the same thing. So that's a conquered mind. So if the mind is controlled, then only one can aspire to make advancement in yoga. Otherwise, it is simply a waste of time. That is why karma and jnana are prerequisite to asthana, because they give one the ability to control one's mind and senses. And the initial 4 stages of the yoga further refine that. So when one is an advanced yogi, then one essentially has complete control on the mind. Okay, so let's move to the next verse. Verse 7. Jittatmana prashantasya parmatma samahitaha shitoshan sukha dukkheshu tatha mana pamanayoho. For one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. So Krishna is essentially repeating some core tenets for the sake of emphasis. So the first point he talks about is the situation of one who has conquered the mind. So what does this mean? Previously we understand that conquest of mind means allowing oneself to be controlled by the words of the Lord, submitting to the Vedic injunctions. So essentially the statement means that for one who has already submitted oneself to the Vedic injunction, the Lord is attainable. Now, Krishna also in this verse blends in the symptoms of one who has conquered the mind, or equivalently the symptom of one who is submitting to the scriptural injunctions. And so he says that to such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same, and he has attained tranquility. Right? So this, as you know, Krishna has repeatedly said, is the symptom of one who is following Nishkam karma. So initially the man cultivating Nishkam karma is trying to achieve these symptoms, is trying to achieve this tranquility or the equanimity. Now this is the situation of an advanced yogi where he has already achieved it. And because of that, Krishna says that the super soul is already reached. Also, when Krishna says the super soul is already reached, it means that attaining the super soul is inevitable. It does not necessarily mean that the person is already fully liberated at this point, but it's kind of like saying that somebody is saying that I have departed to the destination, and if the person is confident about the journey, it's as good as saying that I have reached the destination. Right? So for one who has reached this stage of advancement in the yoga, it's just a matter of time before the person achieves the Supreme Lord. Okay, next verse. Okay, verse 8. Dhyana vijnana triptatma kutasto vijitendriyaha yukta ityuchyate yogi samaloshtashmakanchanaha. A person is said to be established in self-realization and is called a yogi or mystic when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stones or gold, as the same. So verses 7, 8 and 9 are talking about the symptoms of a yoga rudha, of a person who is advanced in yoga. The previous verse talked about how the person is established in equanimity. This verse talks about more so the cause of that equanimity, right? So jnana vijnana triptatma. So Krishna makes this distinction between jnana and vijnana. So jnana is knowledge that is acquired by the senses. So one may be filled with the knowledge of the scriptures, right? So that is academic knowledge. But unless one acts upon it, then the realization will not come. So Vijnana is knowledge upon which one has acted, and it is essentially realized knowledge. So when one has knowledge, when one has realized knowledge, triptatma, and because of that the person is fully satisfied. So what are the manifest symptoms of it? That sama lostashma kanchana, that he sees pebbles, stones or gold as the same, which is another way of saying that the person does not make material distinctions. So the value of gold is a lot more than pebbles, but the person is not attracted to material conception. Prabhupada also gives a more poetic twist to this line, that a person who sees any knowledge that does not lead to Krishna, however advanced it may be, as completely useless. So material knowledge may seem like gold to materialists, right? But for a transcendentalist, it is essentially loshtashma. It's essentially pebbles and stone. Okay, next verse. Okay, verse 9. Surmitra yudasena madhyas devasya bandhushu sadhusvapi chapapesho samabuddhir visheshyate. A person is considered still further advanced when he regards honest well-wisher, affectionate benefactors, the neutral mediators, the envious, friends and enemies, the pious and the sinners, all with an equal mind. So this verse continues to describe the symptoms of an advanced yogi. So Krishna talks about 9 kinds of people in this verse. So there is the suhurt, who desires the welfare of others. There is mitra, who does beneficial acts for another person out of affection. Then there is Ari, who desires the other person's misfortune. So they are inimical. Then there is the Udasin, the person who is neutral in two opposing parties. The Madhyastha is the person who attempts to stop the dispute. The Dvesha is one who hates and deserves to be hated. Bandhu is a person who desires benefit for only those who are in a familial relationship. Sadhu is one who follows the dharma, and Papa is the one who does not follow dharma. So these 9 people represent the complete gamut of how one person may interact with another. So from the sinful and the envious to the neutral to the one desiring benefit for friends and family to one desiring benefit for everyone. Right? So these 9 people exemplify that status. Now, a person who is on the advanced stages of yoga, on the Yoga Rudha platform, he regards everybody as the same. So the previous verses were talking about Samadrishti. So Samadrishti was towards inanimate objects, gold and pebble and stones. Samabuddhi is towards people. That one looks at people with the same vision. And this is a higher platform. Because one may become materially detached, but one may still be agitated to see if somebody is inimical to him. Or one may still get disturbed by seeing one trying to harm others. Or one may become favorably inclined when he sees that a person is following the scriptures and trying to help others. But a yogi at this stage, he regards all of them as the same. So the reason the yogi is able to see all of them at the same level, because he sees the Paramatma within them. By just seeing the Atma, there would still be distinctions made. Because it is because of the will of the Atma that a person is acting in a sinful way. And so conversely, it's by the will of the Atma that a person is acting in a pious way. But when the person starts seeing that this Atma is in the same relationship with the Paramatma as he himself is, then that distinction goes away. Now, important to note is that an advanced yogi, when it is said that does not see the distinction, does not mean that the person becomes blind to these distinctions. What it means is that the person does not discriminate based on these distinctions. The person does not act based on this distinction. But it's not that the person loses their ability to see. Quite the contrary, because they're more connected with both the Atma and the Paramatma, they can see it more at a subtle level also, more than a gross materialist may see. But because seeing the Paramatma situated, they do not act upon it. They don't discriminate between people with this mentality. Okay, next verse. Verse 10. Yogi yunjit sattatam atmanam rahasi stataha ekaki yat chittatma nirasira aparigraha. A transcendentalist should always engage his body, mind and self in relationship with the Supreme. He should live alone in a secluded place and should always carefully control his mind. He should be free from desires and feelings of possessiveness. The previous 3 verses, they talked about the symptoms of an advanced yogi. And from this verse, from verse 10 till 32, so in 23 verses, Krishna will describe the process how to get to that stage. So first, Krishna talks about the perfected stage. And Krishna does it a little bit a way around. So in terms of the symptoms, he first talks about the perfected stage. In terms of the process, he talks about how to get to the perfected stage. And then he will talk about the neophyte, the beginner. One reason Krishna does is because he wants to clearly state the goal. This is the goal, this is the path to it. One understands how difficult it is, how arduous it is. one does not get seduced by the earlier stages of the yoga, which are also difficult but are relatively easy compared to the latter stages. So Krishna is basically saying that be forewarned that this is what you need to do. So after describing the symptoms of Yoga Rudha, Krishna is basically saying that such a person, the process that the person should follow is that he should engage his mind, Atmana. So here Atma means the mind. How? Yunjita. So Yunjita means without cessation, constantly in Samadhi. And where? In Rahasya Sthita. So Rahasya means secret. And here it means secluded. So sitting in a secluded place, being alone without anybody else, such a person should constantly engage his mind in meditation. So that is the injunction, niyam. Do this. What is the prohibition? That the mind should be made devoid of unfavorable activities. Yat chitta atma. So while engaging in the positive, the mind should be devoid of the negative. So this is because such a person is devoid, is so much experiencing happiness in simply sitting alone and meditating, that he has no desire to aparigraha. So aparigraha means he has no desire to get anything else. So parigraha means to acquire. So materialists tend to acquire wealth, and the jnanis, they may try to acquire knowledge. But such a person, he is nirasi. Nirasi means that he is firmly fixed in detachment. So aparigara, he has no desires to accumulate anything else. Okay, next verse.
शुचौ देशे प्रतिष्ठाप्य
स्थिरमासनमात्मनः
नात्युच्छ्रितं नातिनीचं चैलाजिनकुशोत्तरम् तत्रैकाग्रं मनः कृत्वा
तत्रैकाग्रं मनः कृत्वा यत चित्तेन्द्रियक्रियः
उपविश्यासने युञ्ज्याद्योगमात्मविशुद्धये
शुचौ देशे प्रतिष्ठाप्य स्थिरमासनमात्मनः नाति उच्छ्रितं नाति नीचं चैलाजिनकुशोत्तरम् चैलाजिन कुशोत्तरम्
आसनमात्मनः नात्युच्छ्रितं नातिनीचं चैलाजिनकुशोत्तरम्
नात्युच्छ्रितं नातिनीचं चैलाजिनकुशोत्तरम्
तत्रैकाग्रं मनः कृत्वा यतचित्तेन्द्रियक्रियः उपविश्यासने युञ्ज्याद्योगमात्मविशुद्धये
verses 11 and 12. Suchaudeshta pratheshtapya sthiramasanam atmanaha natya uchritam nati nicham chelajana kushotaram tattekragram manaha kritva yata chitendriya kriyaha upavishya sane yunjat yogam atma vishuddhaye. To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deer skin and a soft cloth. The seat should neither be too high nor too low and should be situated in a secret place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses and activities and fixing the mind on one point. So these two verses speak about the sitting place primarily. So the asana, the sitting place of the yogi should be in a naturally pure place, such as the banks of a holy river like Ganga, or in a mountain cave in the Himalayas, or in a place that has been cleaned by himself, which means that should not be taking help from others. The asana should be stable, should not be moving. It should not be too high nor too low. And the asana should be essentially kusha grass and covering a soft cloth and deer skin. So the asana is meant for one's own use, atmanaha. So amongst the yogis it is forbidden to use another person's seat, as that is unfavorable to yoga practice, because you do not know the other person's state of mind or even consent. So these are practical instructions that Krishna gives. Sitting is recommended as the best posture for meditation, because standing a person may tire and lying down the person may go to sleep. So sitting is recommended. Then kusha grass is considered to be auspicious, and it is an ingredient on all Vedic sacrifices. Deer skin is not only comfortable, but it also has the property of repelling snakes and scorpions and insects, etc. So understanding that the yogi would be sitting there for long periods of time, and if the person gets attacked by snakes and insects, it would be interfering with the person's meditation. So kusha grass for auspiciousness and deer skin for its protective properties. Then the asana should be neither too high nor too low, because if one is sitting on a very high asana, they may develop pride, and if they are sitting on too low asana, it may be out of artificial humility, or the place might get flooded by rains, etc. So the asana should be neither too high nor too low, and it should be firm. So if the person picks an asana in a place that is constantly moving, then the person would be more worried about not tipping over and falling than performing meditation. So as I mentioned, these are instructions that essentially Krishna is giving for the sake of from a practical situation. Okay, so we'll end over here, and in our next discussion we will resume from verse 15. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.